Mr. Punch presents The Letters of Jane Austen, abridged by Lissa Demetriou and performed by Fiona Shaw.
The Bull and George, Dartford, Wednesday, the 24th of October, 1798. To my sister Cassandra. You have already heard in what excellent time we reached and quitted Sittingbourne, and how very well my mother bore her journey thither. She was very little fatigued on her arrival, has been refreshed by a comfortable dinner, and now seems quite stout. It wanted 5 minutes of 12 when we left Sittingbourne, from whence we had a famous pair of horses, which took us to Rochester in an hour and a quarter. The postboy seemed determined to show my mother that Kentish drivers were not always tedious. Our next stage was not so expeditiously performed. The road was heavy, and our horses very indifferent. However, we were in good time, and my mother bore her journey so well that expedition was of little importance to us. My mother took some of her bitters at Ospringe and some more at Rochester, and she ate bread several times. We have got apartments up 2 pairs of stairs, as we could not be otherwise accommodated with a sitting-room and bed-chambers on the same floor. We have 1 double-bedded and 1 single-bedded room. In the former, my mother and I are to sleep. We sat down to dinner a little after 5, and had some beefsteaks and a boiled fowl, but no oyster sauce. I should have begun my letter soon after our arrival, but for a little adventure which prevented me. After we had been here a quarter of an hour, it was discovered that my writing and dressing boxes had been by accident put into a chaise, which was just packing off as we came in, and were driven away towards Gravesend, in their way to the West Indies. No part of my property could have been such a prize before, for in my writing box was all my worldly wealth, £7. Mr. Notley immediately dispatched a man and horse after the chaise, and in half an hour's time I had the pleasure of being as rich as ever. My day's journey has been pleasanter in every respect than I expected. I have been very little crowded, and by no means unhappy. Your watchfulness with regard to the weather on our account was very kind and very effectual. We had 1 heavy shower on leaving Sittingbourne, but afterwards the clouds cleared away, and we had a very bright crystal afternoon. My father is now reading the Midnight Bell, which he has got from the library, and mother is sitting by the fire. Our route tomorrow is not determined. We have none of us much inclination for London, and if Mr. Notley will give us leave, I think we shall go to Staines through Croydon and Kingston, which will be much pleasanter than any other way. But he has decided for Clapham and Battersea. God bless you all. Saturday, the 27th of October, Steventon, Hampshire. Your letter was a most agreeable surprise to me today, and I have taken a long sheet of paper to show my gratitude. We arrived home yesterday between 4 and 5, but I cannot send you quite so triumphant an account of our last day's journey as of the first and second. Soon after I had finished my letter from Staines, my mother began to suffer from the exercise and fatigue of travelling so far, and she was a good deal indisposed from that particular kind of evacuation which has generally preceded her illnesses. She had not a very good night at Staines, and felt a heat in her throat as we travelled yesterday morning, which seemed to foretell more bile. She bore her journey, however, much better than I had expected, and at Basingstoke, where we stopped more than half an hour, received much comfort from a mess of broth and the sight of Mr. Lifford, who recommended her to take 12 drops of laudanum when she went to bed as a composer. James called on us just as we were going to tea, and my mother was well enough to talk very cheerfully to him before she went to bed. Lifford has promised to call in the course of a few days, and then they will settle about the dandelion tea. Our brother James seems to have taken to his old trick of coming to Steventon from Dean, in spite of wife Mary's reproaches, for he was here before breakfast, and is now paying us a second visit. Mary is quite well, he says, and uncommonly large, even for 8 months. They were to have dined here today, but the weather is too bad. We met with no adventures at all on our journey, except that our trunk once nearly slipped off, and we obliged to stop at Hartley to have our wheels greased. While my mother and Mr. Lifford were together, I went to Mrs. Ryder's and bought what I intended, but not in much perfection. There were no narrow braces for children, and scarcely any netting silk. I gave 2 and 3pence a yard for my flannel, and I fancy it is not very good. But it is so contemptible an article that in itself, that its being comparatively good or bad is of little importance. I bought some Japan ink likewise, and next week shall begin my operations on my hat, on which you know my principal hopes of happiness depend. I am very grand indeed. I had the dignity of dropping my mother's laudanum last night. I carry about the keys of the wine and closet, and twice since I began this letter have had orders to give in the kitchen. Our dinner was very good yesterday, and the chicken boiled perfectly tender. I shall not be obliged to dismiss Nanny on that account. Almost everything was unpacked and put away last night. Nanny chose to do it, and I was not sorry to be busy. I have unpacked the gloves and placed yours in your drawer. Their colour is light and pretty, and I believe exactly what we fixed on. Mrs. Hall of Sherborne was brought to bed yesterday of a dead child some weeks before she expected, owing to a fright. I suppose she happened unawares to look at her husband. The books from Winton are all unpacked and put away. The binding has compressed them most conveniently, and there is now very good room in the bookcase for all that we wish to have there. My mother has not been down at all today. The laudanum made her sleep a good deal, and upon the whole I think she is better. My father and I dine by ourselves. How strange. I will leave off, or I shall not have room to add a word tomorrow. Sunday. My mother has had a very good night, and though she did not get up at breakfast, feels much better today. I will write to Charles soon. Pray give Fanny and Edward a kiss for me, and ask George if he has a new song for me. 'Tis really very kind of my aunt to ask us to Bath again, a kindness that deserves a better return than to profit by it. Saturday, the 17th of November. If you paid any attention to the conclusion of my last letter, you will be satisfied before you receive this that my mother has had no relapse, and though she does not gain strength very rapidly, my expectations are humble enough not to outstride her improvements. She was about to sit up nearly 8 hours yesterday, and today I hope we shall do as much. So much for my patient. My mother desires me to tell you that I am a very good housekeeper, which I have no reluctance in doing, because I think it my peculiar excellence, and for this reason I always take care to provide such things as please my own appetite. I have had some ragout veal, and I mean to have some haricot mutton tomorrow. We are to kill a pig soon. There is to be a ball at Basingstoke next Thursday. Our assemblies have very kindly declined ever since we laid down the carriage, so that my disconvenience and disinclination to go have kept pace together. My father's affection for Miss Cuthbert is as lively as ever, and he begs that you will not neglect to send him intelligence of her or her brother whenever you have any to send. I am also to tell you that one of his Leicestershire sheep sold to the butcher's last week weighed 27 pounds and a quarter per quarter. I went to Dean with my father 2 days ago to see Mary, who is still plagued with the rheumatism, which she would be very glad to get rid of, and still more glad to get rid of her child, of whom she is heartily tired. Her nurse has come and has no particular charm either of person or manner, but as all the Hurstbourne world pronounce her to be the best nurse that ever was, Mary expects her attachment to increase. What fine weather this is! Not very becoming perhaps early in the morning, but very pleasant out of doors at noon, and very wholesome. At least everybody fancies so, and imagination is everything. I have not taken to far as yet. I believe I never told you that Mrs. Coulthard and Anne, late of Manydown, are both dead, and both died in childbed. We have not regaled Mary with this news. I am very fond of experimental housekeeping, such as having an ox cheek now and then. I shall have one next week, and I mean to have some little dumplings put into it, that I may fancy myself at Gummersham. I hope George was pleased with my designs. Perhaps they would have suited him as well had they been less elaborately finished, but an artist cannot do anything slovenly. I have just received a note from James to say that Mary was brought to bed last night at 11 o'clock of a fine little boy, and that everything is going on very well. My mother had desired to know nothing of it before it should be all over, and we were clever enough to prevent her having any suspicion of it, though Jenny, who had been left here by her mistress, was sent for home. My mother continues well. Sunday, the 25th of November. I expected to have heard from you this morning, but no letter has come. I shall not take the trouble of announcing to you any more of Mary's children, if instead of thanking me for the intelligence, you always sit down and write to James. I am sure nobody can desire your letters so much as I do, and I don't think anybody deserves them so well. Having now relieved my heart of a great deal of malevolence, I will proceed to tell you that Mary continues quite well, and my mother tolerably so. I saw the former on Friday, and though I had seen her comparatively hearty the Tuesday before, I was really amazed at the improvement which 3 days had made in her. I had only a glimpse at the child, who was asleep, but Miss de Barry told me that his eyes were large, dark, and handsome. She looks as much as she used to, is netting herself a gown in worsteds, and wears what Mrs. Birch would call a pot hat, a short and compendious history of Miss de Barry. Our family affairs are rather deranged at present, for Nanny has kept her bed these 3 or 4 days with a pain in her side and fever, and we are forced to have 2 charwomen, which is not very comfortable. She is considerably better now, but it must be still some time, I suppose, before she is able to do anything. You and Edward will be amused, I think, when you know that Nanny Littlewood dresses my hair. You must tell Edward that my father gives 25 shillings apiece to Seward for his last lot of sheep, and in return for this news, my father wishes to receive some of Edward's pigs. We have got Boswell's Tour to the Hebrides, and are to have his Life of Johnson. And as some money will yet remain in Burden's hands, it is to be laid out in the purchase of Cowper's works. By the by, I have written to Mrs. Birch among my other writings, and so I hope to have some account of all the people in that part of the world before long. And Mrs. Heathcote has been ill-natured enough to send me a letter of inquiry. So that altogether I am tolerably tired of letter writing, and unless I have anything new to tell you of my mother or Mary, I shall not write again for many days. Perhaps a little repose may restore my regard for a pen. Saturday, the 1st of December. I am so good as to write to you again thus speedily to let you know that I have just heard from Frank. Our brother was at Cadiz, alive and well, on October the 19th, and had then very lately received a letter from you, written as long ago as when the London was at St. Helens. Lord St. Vincent had left the fleet when he wrote, and was gone to Gibraltar. It was said to superintend the fitting out of a private expedition from thence against some of the enemy's ports. Minorca or Malta were conjectured to be the objects. Frank writes in good spirits, but says that our correspondence cannot be so easily carried on in future as it has been, as the communication between Cadiz and Lisbon is less frequent than formerly. You and my mother, therefore, must not alarm yourselves at the long intervals that may divide his letters. I address this advice to you two as being the most tender-hearted of the family. My mother made her entree into the dressing-room through crowds of admiring spectators yesterday afternoon, and we all drank tea together for the first time these 5 weeks. She has had a tolerable night, and bids fair for a continuance in the same brilliant course of action today. Mr. Lifford was here yesterday. He came in while we were at dinner, and partook of our elegant entertainment. I was not ashamed at asking him to sit down to table, for we had some pea soup, a spare rib, and a pudding. He wants my mother to look yellow and throw out a rash, but she will do neither. I was at Dean yesterday morning. Mary was very well, but does not gain bodily strength very fast. She does not manage matters in such a way as to make me want to lay in myself. She is not tidy enough in her appearance. She has no dressing gown to sit up in. Her curtains are all too thin, and things are not in that comfort and style about her which are necessary to make such a situation an enviable one. Elizabeth was really a pretty object, with her nice clean cap put on so tidily, and her dress so uniformly white and orderly. I have made myself 2 or 3 caps to wear of evenings since I came home, and they save me a world of torment as to hairdressing, which at present gives me no trouble beyond washing and brushing, for my long hair is always plaited up out of sight, and my short hair curls well enough to want no papering. I have had it cut lately by Mr. Butler. Charles Powlett gave a dance on Thursday, to the great disturbance of all his neighbours, of course, who, you know, take a most lively interest in the state of his finances, and live in hopes of his being soon ruined. We are very much disposed to like our new maid. She knows nothing of a dairy, to be sure, which in our family is rather against her, but she is to be taught it all. In short, we have felt the inconvenience of being without a maid so long that we are determined to like her. Sunday. My father is glad to hear so good an account of Edward's pigs, and desires he may be told, as encouragement to his taste for them, that Lord Bolton is particularly curious in his pigs, has had pigsties of a most elegant construction built for them, and visits them every morning, as soon as he rises. Tuesday, the 18th of December. I have received a very civil note from Mrs. Martin, requesting my name as a subscriber to her library, which opens the 14th of January, and my name, or rather yours, is accordingly given. My mother finds the money. Mary subscribes too, which I am glad of, but hardly expected. As an inducement to subscribe, Mrs. Martin tells us that her collection is not to consist only of novels, but of every kind of literature, etc. She might have spared this pretension to our family, who are great novel readers and not ashamed of being so, but it was necessary, I suppose, to the self-consequence of half her subscribers. I enjoyed the hard black frosts of last week very much, and one day, while they lasted, walked to Dean by myself. I do not know that I did such a thing in my life before. Charles Powlett has been very ill, but is getting well again. His wife is discovered to be everything that the neighbourhood could wish her, silly and cross as well as extravagant. Earl Harwood and his friend Mr. Bailey came to Dean yesterday. He has got the appointment to a prisonship at Portsmouth, which he has been for some time desirous of having, and he and his wife are to live on board. We dine now at 3:30, and have done dinner, I suppose, before you begin. We drink tea at 6:30. I'm afraid you will despise us. My father reads Cowper to us in the evening, to which I listen when I can. How do you spend your evenings? I guess that Elizabeth works, that you read to her, and that Edward goes to sleep. My mother continues hearty. Her appetite and nights are very good, but her bowels are still not entirely settled, and she sometimes complains of an asthma and dropsy, water in her chest, and a liver disorder. I have changed my mind, and changed the trimmings of my cap, as you suggested. I felt as if I should not prosper if I strayed from your directions, and I think it makes me look more like Lady Cunningham, which is all that one lives for now. I have been forced to let James and Mr. Barry have 2 sheets of your drawing paper, but they shan't have any more. There are not above 3 or 4 left, besides one of a smaller and richer sort. I've just heard from Frank. His letter was written on the 1st of November. All well, and nothing particular. Monday night, December the 24th. I have got some pleasant news for you, which I am eager to communicate. Admiral Gambier, in reply to my father's application, writes as follows. As it is usual to keep young officers in small vessels, it being most proper on account of their inexperience, and it being also a situation where they are more in the way of learning their duty, your son Charles has been continued in the Scorpion. But I have mentioned to the Board of Admiralty his wish to be in a frigate, and when a proper opportunity offers and is judged that he has taken his turn in a small ship, I hope he will be removed. With regard to your son Frank, now in the London, I am glad I can give you the assurance that his promotion is likely to take place very soon, as Lord Spencer has been so good as to say he would include him in an arrangement that he proposes making relative to some promotions in that quarter. There. I may now finish my letter and go and hang myself, for I am sure I can neither write nor do anything which will not appear insipid to you after this, and only wish we could communicate our foreknowledge of the event to him whom it principally concerns. I returned from Manydown this morning and found my mother certainly in no worse respect than I left her. She does not like the cold weather, but that we cannot help. I spent my time very quietly and very pleasantly with Catherine. Miss Blashford is agreeable enough. I do not want people to be very agreeable, as it saves me the trouble of liking them a great deal. Our ball was very thin, but by no means unpleasant. There were 31 people and only 11 ladies out of the number, and but 5 single women in the room. Mr. Calland appeared as usual, with his hat in his hand, and stood every now and then behind Catherine and me, to be talked to and abused for not dancing. We teased him, however, into it at last. I was very glad to see him again after so long a separation, and he was altogether rather the genius and the flirt of the evening. He inquired after you. There were 20 dancers, and I danced them all, and without fatigue. My black cap was openly admired by Mrs. Lefroy, and secretly, I imagine, by everybody else in the room. Tuesday. I thank you for your long letter, which I will endeavour to deserve by writing the rest of this as closely as possible. I am full of joy at much of your information, that you should have been to a ball and have danced at it, and supped with the prince, and that you should meditate the purchase of a new muslin gown are delightful circumstances. I am determined to buy a handsome one whenever I can, and I am so tired and ashamed of half my present stock that I even blush at the sight of a wardrobe which contains them. I wish you a Merry Christmas, but no compliments of the season. Poor Edward! It is very hard that he, who has everything else in the world that he can wish for, should not have good health too. But I hope with the assistance of bowel complaints, faintnesses, and sicknesses, he will soon be restored to that blessing likewise. If his nervous complaint proceeded from a suppression of something that ought to be thrown out, which does not seem unlikely, the first of those disorders may really be a remedy. My mother's spirits are not affected by her complication of disorders. On the contrary, they are altogether as good as ever. I was to have dined at Dean today, but the weather is so cold that I am not sorry to be kept at home by the appearance of snow. We are to have company to dinner on Friday, the 3 Digweeds and James. We shall be a nice, silent party, I suppose. My mother wants to know whether Edward has ever made a hen-house, which they planned together. You deserve a longer letter than this, but it is my unhappy fate seldom to treat people as well as they deserve. Friday, the 28th of December. Frank is made. He was yesterday raised to the rank of commander and appointed to the petrol sloop now at Gibraltar. Likewise, Lieutenant Charles John Austen is removed to the Tamar. This comes from the Admiral. We cannot find out where the Tamar is, but we hope we shall now see Charles here at all events. This letter is to be dedicated entirely to good news. If you will send my father an account of your washing and letter expenses, etc., he will send you a draft for the amount of it, as well as for your next quarter, and for Edward's rent. If you don't buy a muslin gown now on the strength of this money and Frank's promotion, I shall never forgive you. "13 Queen Square, Bath, Friday, May the 17th, 1799. Well, here we are at Bath. We got here about 1 o'clock and have been arrived just long enough to go over the house, fix on our rooms, and be very well pleased. I have got so many things to say that I know not on which to decide, and shall therefore go and eat with the children. We stopped in the Paragon as we came along, but it was too wet and dirty for us to get out. At the bottom of Kingsdown Hill, we met a gentleman in a buggy who, on a minute examination, turned out to be Dr. Hall, and Dr. Hall in such a very deep mourning that either his mother, his wife, or himself must be dead. We are exceedingly pleased with the house. The rooms are quite as large as we expected. Mrs. Bromley is a fat woman in mourning, and a little black kitten runs about the staircase. We have 2 very nice-sized rooms with dirty quilts and everything comfortable. I have the outer and larger apartment, as I ought to have, and my mother's is not materially less. The beds are both as large as any at Steventon, and I have a very nice chest of drawers and a closet full of shelves. I hope it will be a tolerable afternoon. When first we came, all the umbrellas were up, but now the pavements are getting very white again. My mother does not seem at all the worse for her journey, nor are any of us, though Edward seemed rather fagged last night and not very brisk this morning, but I trust the bustle of sending out for tea, coffee and sugar, etc., and going out to taste a cheese himself will do him good. There was a very long list of arrivals here in the newspaper yesterday, so that we need not immediately dread absolute solitude. And there is a public breakfast in Sydney Gardens every morning, so that we shall not be wholly starved. I like our situation very much. It is far more cheerful than the Paragon, and the prospect from the drawing-room window, at which I now write, is rather picturesque, as it commands a perspective view of the left side of Brock Street, broken by 3 Lombardy poplars in the garden of the last house in Queen's Parade. Sunday, June the 2nd. What must I tell you of Edward? Truth or falsehood? He was better yesterday than he had been for 2 or 3 days before, about as well as while he was at Steventon. He drinks at the Hetling pump, is to bathe tomorrow, and try electricity on Tuesday. He proposed the latter himself to Dr. Fellows, who made no objection to it, but I fancy we were all unanimous in expecting no advantage from it. My mother seems remarkably well. My uncle overwalked himself at first, and can now only travel in a chair, but is otherwise very well. I saw some gauzes in a shop in Bath Street yesterday at only 4 shillings a yard, but they were not so good or so pretty as mine. Flowers are very much worn, and fruit is still more the thing. Elizabeth has a bunch of strawberries, and I have seen grapes, cherries, plums, and tamarinds at the grocer's, but I've never seen any of them in hats. A plum or green gage would cost 3 shillings, cherries and grapes about 5, but this is at the dearest shops. My aunt has told me of a very cheap one near Walcott Church, to which I may go in quest of something for you. There is to be a grand gala on Tuesday evening in Sydney Gardens, a concert with illuminations and fireworks. To the latter, Elizabeth and I look forward with pleasure, and even the concert will have more than its usual charm for me, as the gardens are large enough for me to get pretty well beyond the reach of its sound. I shall not forget to write to Frank. Duty and love, etc. P.S. My uncle is quite surprised at my hearing from you so often. The 11th of June. Your letter yesterday made me very happy. I feel tolerably secure of our getting away next week, though it is certainly possible that we may remain until the 27th. Edward has been pretty well for this last week, And as the Waters have never disagreed with him in any respect, we are inclined to hope that he will derive advantage from them in the end. Benjamin Portal is here. How charming that is. I do not know exactly why, but the phrase followed so naturally that I could not help putting it down. I'm very glad you liked my lace, and so are you, and so is Martha, and we are all glad together. I do not know what the matter with me is today, but I cannot write quietly. Fortunately, I have nothing very particular to say. We walked to Weston one evening last week. What very much? Weston? No, walking to Weston. I have not expressed myself properly, but I hope you will understand me. It is rather impertinent to suggest any household care to a housekeeper, but I just venture to say that the coffee mill will be wanted every day while Edward is at Steventon, as he always drinks coffee for breakfast. Steventon, Saturday, the 1st of November, 1800. You have written, I am sure, though I have received no letter from you since your leaving London. The post and not yourself must have been unpunctual. We have at last heard from Frank. A letter from him to you came yesterday, and I mean to send it on as soon as I can. En attendant, you must rest satisfied with knowing that on the 8th of July the Petrel, with the rest of the Egyptian squadron, was off the Isle of Cyprus, whither they went from Jaffa for provisions, and whence they were to sail in a day or two for Alexandria, there to wait the result of the English proposals for the evacuation of Egypt. The rest of the letter, according to the present fashionable style of composition, is chiefly descriptive. Of his promotion he knows nothing, and of prizes he is still guiltless. Your letter is come. It came, indeed, 12 lines ago, but I could not stop to acknowledge it before, and I am glad it did not arrive till I had completed my first sentence, because the sentence had been made ever since yesterday, and I think forms a very good beginning. Did you think of our ball on Thursday evening, and did you suppose me at it? I dined and slept at Dean. Charlotte and I did my hair, which, I fancy, looked very indifferent. Nobody abused it, however, and I retired delighted with my success. It was a pleasant ball, and still more good than pleasant, for there were nearly 60 people, and sometimes we had 17 couple. There was a scarcity of men in general, and a still greater scarcity of any that were good for much. There was commonly a couple of ladies standing up together, but not often any so amiable as ourselves. You were inquired after very prettily, and I hope the whole assembly now understands that you are gone into Kent, which the families in general seem to meet in ignorance of. Lady Portsmouth had got a different dress on, and Lady Bolton is much improved by a wig. Saturday, the 8th of November. The tables are come, and give general contentment. I had not expected that they would so perfectly suit the fancy of us all three, or that we should so well agree in the disposition of them. But nothing except their own surface could have been smoother. The two ends put together form our constant table for everything, and the centrepiece stands exceedingly well under the glass, holds a great deal commodiously, without looking awkwardly. They are both covered with green baize and send their best love. The Pembroke has got its destination by the sideboard, and my mother has great delight in keeping her money and papers locked up. The little table which used to stand there has most conveniently taken itself off into the best bedroom. Earl Harwood has been again giving uneasiness to his family and talk to the neighbourhood. In the present instance, however, he is only unfortunate and not in fault. About 10 days ago, in cocking a pistol in the guard-room at Marcoux, he accidentally shot himself through the thigh. 2 young Scotch surgeons on the island were polite enough to propose taking off the thigh at once, but he would not consent, and accordingly, in his wounded state, was put on board a cutter and conveyed to Gosport, where the bullet was extracted. The surgeon of the hospital wrote to his family, and John Harwood went down immediately, attended by James, whose object in going was to be the means of bringing back the earliest intelligence to Mr. and Mrs. Harwood, whose anxious sufferings have, of course, been dreadful. One material comfort, however, they have, the assurance of its being really an accidental wound, which is testified by the particular direction of the bullet. Such a wound could not have been received in a duel. Yesterday, a sudden invitation and a post-chaise took us to Ash Park to dine tete-a-tete with Mr. Holder, Mr. Gauntlet and Mr. Digweed, but our tete-a-tete was cruelly reduced by the non-attendance of the two latter. We had a very quiet evening. I believe Mary found it dull, but I thought it very pleasant. To sit in idleness over a good fire in a well-proportioned room is a luxurious sensation. Sometimes we talked, and sometimes we were quite silent. I said one or two amusing things, and Mr. Holder made a few infamous puns. Mr. Holder's paper tells us that sometime last August, Captain Austen and the Petrel were very, very active in securing a Turkish ship driven into port in Cyprus by bad weather from the French. He was forced to burn her, however. You will see the account in the Sun, I dare say. Sunday. We have had a dreadful storm, which has done a great deal of mischief among our trees. I was sitting alone in the drawing room when an odd kind of crash startled me. I then went to the window, which I reached just in time to see the last of our two highly valued elms descend into the sweep. The other, nearest the pond, taking a more easterly direction, sunk amongst our screen of chestnuts and firs. That is not all. One large elm, as you enter the elm walk, was likewise blown down. The maypole bearing the weathercock was broken too, and what I regret more than all the rest is that the 3 elms which grew in Hall's meadow and gave such ornament to it are gone. Thursday, November the 20th. Your letter took me quite by surprise this morning. You are very much welcome, however, and I am very much obliged to you. I believe I drank too much wine last night at Hurstbourne. I know not how else to account for the shaking of my hand today. You will kindly make allowance, therefore, for any indistinctness of writing by attributing it to this venial error. Charles came yesterday morning. We walked to Dean to dinner. He danced the whole evening, and today is no more tired than a gentleman ought to be. There were very few beauties at our ball, and such as there were not handsome. Mrs. Blount was the only one much admired. She appeared exactly as she did in September, with the same broad face, diamond bandeau, white shoes, pink husband, and fat neck. The 2 Miss Coxes were there. I traced in one the remains of the vulgar, broad-featured girl who danced at Enham 8 years ago, and the other is refined into a nice, composed-looking girl like Catherine Bigg. Mr. Barry, Susan, and Sally, all in black, made their appearance, and I was as civil to them as their bad breath would allow me. We had a very pleasant day on Monday at Ash. We sat down 14 to dinner in the study, the dining-room being not habitable from the storms having blown down its chimney. There was a whist and a casino table. Matthew Robinson fell asleep. James and Mrs. Augusta alternately read Dr. Jenner's pamphlet on the cowpox, and I bestowed my company by turns on all. P.S. I rejoice to say that we have just had another letter from our dear Frank, written from Larnaca in Cyprus, and so lately as the 2nd of October. He came from Alexandria and was to return there in 3 or 4 days. He wrote a few days before to you by the Mercury, sent with dispatches to Lord Keith. January the 3rd, 1801. As you have by this time received my last letter, it is fit I should begin another. And I begin with the hope that you often wore a white gown in the morning at the time of all the gay parties being with you. Our visit to Ash Park last Wednesday went off in a comme ça way. We met Mr. Lefroy and Tom Shute, played at cards, and came home again. When we move, there are 3 parts of Bath which we thought of as likely to have suitable houses in them. The buildings are new, and its nearness to Kingsmead Fields would be a pleasant circumstance. The houses in the streets near Laura Place I should expect are above our price. Gay Street would be too high, except only the Law House on the left-hand side as you ascend. Towards that my mother has no disinclination. You and Edward may confer together, and your opinion expected with eagerness. I do not know how to give up the idea of our both going to the Paragon in May. Your going I consider as indispensably necessary, and I shall not like being left behind. There is no place here that I shall want to be staying at. As to the trouble of accommodating us, whether there are one or two, it is much the same. According to the first plan, my mother and our two selves are to travel down together, and my father follow us afterwards. We must all meet at Bath, you know, before we set off for the sea. My father and mother, wisely aware of the difficulty of finding in all Bath such a bed as their own, have resolved on taking it with them. All the beds, indeed, that we shall want are to be removed, viz., besides theirs, our own two, the best for a spare one, and two for servants. I do not think it will be worth while to remove any of our chests of drawers. We shall be able to get some of a much more commodious form made of deal and painted to look very neat. And I flatter myself that for little comforts of all kinds, our apartment will be one of the most complete of the sort all over Bath. I have now attained the true art of letter writing, which we are always told is to express on paper exactly what one would say to the same person by word of mouth. I have been talking to you almost as fast as I could, the whole of this letter. My mother bargains for having no trouble at all in furnishing our house in Bath. I get more and more reconciled to the idea of our removal. We have lived long enough in this neighbourhood. There is something interesting in the bustle of going away, and the prospect of spending future summers by the sea or in Wales is very delightful. It must not be generally known, however, that I am not sacrificing a great deal in quitting the county, or I can expect to inspire no tenderness, no interest in those we leave behind. My father is doing all in his power to increase his income by raising his tithes, etc., and I do not despair of getting very nearly 600 a year. In what part of Bath do you mean to place your bees? We are afraid of the South Parades being too hot. January the 21st. Expect a most agreeable letter, for, having nothing at all to say, I shall have no check to my genius. Well, so, Frank's letter has made you very happy. What a surprise to him it must have been on the 20th of October to be visited, collared and thrust out of the Petrel by Captain Inglis. He kindly passes over the poignancy of his feelings in quitting his ship, his officers and his men. Elizabeth talks of having read in a newspaper that all the first lieutenants of the frigates, whose captains were not to be sent into line of battleships, were to be promoted to the rank of commander. Elizabeth says she's quite well, but she is thinner than when we saw her last, and in not very good looks. She cuts her hair too short over her forehead, and does not wear her cap far enough upon her head. In spite of these many disadvantages, however, I can still admire her beauty. They all dine here today. Much good may it do us all. Mary will be much obliged to you if you can bring her the pattern of the jacket and trousers, or whatever it is, that Elizabeth's boys wear when they are first put into breeches. Or if you could bring her an old suit itself, she would be very glad. But that, I suppose, is hardly doable. I join with you in wishing for the environs of Laura Place, but do not venture to expect it. My mother hankers after the square dreadfully, and it is but natural to suppose that my uncle will take her part. It would be very pleasant to be near Sydney Gardens. We might go into the labyrinth every day. The Paragon, Bath, Tuesday, the 6th of May. I have the pleasure of writing from my own room, up 2 pairs of stairs, with everything very comfortable around me. Our journey here was perfectly free from accident or event. We changed horses at the end of every stage and paid at almost every turnpike. We had charming weather, hardly any dust, and were exceedingly agreeable, as we did not speak above once in 3 miles. We drank tea as soon as we arrived. The first view of Bath in fine weather does not answer my expectations. I think I see more distinctly through rain. The sun was got behind everything, and the appearance of the place from the top of Kingsdown was all vapour, shadow, smoke and confusion. I fancy we are to have a house in Seymour Street or thereabouts. My uncle and aunt both like the situation. I am not without hopes of tempting Mrs. Lloyd to settle in Bath. Meat is only 8 pence a pound, butter 12 pence, and cheese 9.5 pence. You must carefully conceal from her, however, the exorbitant price of fish. A salmon has been sold at 2.9 pence per pound, the whole fish. The Duchess of York's removal is expected to make that article more reasonable. Until it really appears so, say nothing about salmon. My mother has ordered a new bonnet, and so have I, both white chip, trimmed with white ribbon. I find my straw bonnet looking very much like other people's, and quite as smart. I am proud to say that I have a very good eye for an adulteress. For though repeatedly assured that another in the same party was the she, I fixed upon the right one from the first. She is not so pretty as I expected. Her face has the same defect of baldness as her sister's, and her features not so handsome. She was highly rouged, and looked rather quietly and contentedly silly than anything else. Your Sunday's letter is very long and agreeable. I fancy you know many more particulars of our sale than we do. We have heard the price of nothing but the cows, bacon, hay, hops, tables, and my father's chest of drawers and study table. I have bestowed 3 calls of inquiry on the Mapletons, and I fancy very beneficial ones to Marianne, as I am always told that she is better. I have not seen any of them. Her complaint is a bilious fever. Another stupid party last night. Perhaps if larger they might be less intolerable. But here there were only just enough to make one card table, with 6 people to look over and talk nonsense to each other. I respect Mrs. Chamberlain for doing her hair well, but cannot feel a more tender sentiment. Miss Langley is like any other short girl with a broad nose and wide mouth, fashionable dress and exposed bosom. Thursday, May the 21st. To make long sentences upon unpleasant subjects is very odious, and I shall therefore get rid of the one now uppermost in my thoughts as soon as possible. Our views on Green Park buildings seem all at an end. The observation of damps still remaining in the offices of an house which has only been vacated a week, with reports of discontented families and putrid fevers, has given the coup de grace. We have now nothing in view. When you arrive, we will at least have the pleasure of examining some of these putrefying houses again. They are so very desirable in size and situation. We are to have a tiny party here tonight. I hate tiny parties. They force one into constant exertion, and I am prevented from setting my black cap at Mr. Maitland by his having a wife and 10 children. My aunt has a very bad cough. Do not forget to have heard about that when you come, and I think she is deafer than ever. You will be sorry to hear that Marianne Stapleton's disorder has ended fatally. She was believed out of danger on Sunday, but a sudden relapse carried her off the next day. So affectionate a family must suffer severely, and many a girl on early death has been praised into an angel on slighter pretensions to beauty, sense, and merit than Marianne. Tuesday. The Endymion came into Portsmouth on Sunday, and I have sent Charles a short letter by this day's post. Marianne was buried yesterday, and I called without expecting to be let in to inquire after them all. On the servant's invitation, however, I sent in my name, and Jane and Christiana, who were walking in the garden, came to me immediately, and I sat with them about 10 minutes. They looked pale and dejected, but were more composed than I had thought probable. When I mentioned your coming here on Monday, they said they should be very glad to see you. Wednesday. I am just returned from my airing in the very bewitching phaeton and four, for which I was prepared by a note from Mr. Evelyn soon after breakfast. We went to the top of Kingsdown and had a very pleasant drive. On my return, I found your letter and a letter from Charles on the table. He has received £30 for his share of the privateer and expects £10 more. But of what avail is it to take prizes if he lays out the produce in presents to his sisters? He has been buying gold chains and topaz crosses for us. He must be well scolded. The Endymion has already received orders for taking troops to Egypt, which I should not like at all if I did not trust to Charles being removed from her somehow or other before she sails. Lyme Regis, Friday, the 14th of September, 1804. I take the first sheet of this fine striped paper to thank you for your letter from Weymouth. Your account of Weymouth contains nothing which strikes me so forcibly as there being no ice in the town. For every other vexation I was prepared, and particularly for your disappointment in not seeing the royal couple go on board on Tuesday, having already heard from Mr. Crawford that he had seen you in the very act of being too late. But for there being no ice, what could prepare me? Weymouth is altogether a shocking place, I perceive. I continue quite well, in proof of which I have bathed again this morning. It was absolutely necessary that I should have the little fever and indisposition which I had. It has been all the fashion this week in Lyme. Miss Anna Cove was confined for a day or two, and her mother thinks she was saved only by a timely emetic from a serious illness, and Miss Bonham has been under Mr. Carpenter's care for several days, with a sort of nervous fever. We are settled in our lodgings by this time, as you may suppose. The servants behave very well and make no difficulties, although nothing can exceed the inconvenience of the offices except the general dirtiness of the house and furniture and all its inhabitants. I endeavour as far as I can to supply your place, be useful, and keep things in order. I detect dirt in the water decanter as fast as I can, and give the cook physic. James is the delight of our lives. My mother's shoes were never so well blacked before, and our plate so clean. He waits extremely well, is attentive, handy, quick, and quiet, and in short has a great many of the cardinal virtues, amongst the rest that of wishing to go to Bath. I called yesterday morning on Miss Armstrong, and we walked together for an hour on the Cobb. Friday. The bathing was so delightful this morning that I believe I stayed in rather too long, and since the middle of the day I have felt unreasonably tired. I shall be more careful another time. Jenny and James are to walk to Charmouth this afternoon. I am glad to see such an amusement for him, as I am very anxious for his being at once quiet and happy. He can read, and I must get him some books. Unfortunately, he has read the first volume of Robinson Crusoe. We have the Pinkards newspaper, however, which I shall take care to lend him. Green Park Buildings, Bath, Tuesday, the 22nd of January, 1805. To Captain Austen, HMS Leopard, Portsmouth. My dearest Frank, your affectionate heart will be greatly wounded, and I wish the shock could have been lessened by a better preparation. But the event has been sudden, and so must the information of it. We have lost an excellent father. An illness of only 48 hours carried him off yesterday morning between 10 and 11. He was seized on Saturday with the return of the feverish complaint that he had been subject to for the last 3 years. Evidently a more violent attack from the first, as the applications which before produced almost immediate relief seemed for some time to afford him scarcely any. On Sunday, however, he was much better, so much so as to give us every hope of his being well again in a few days. But these hopes gradually gave way as the day advanced. and when Bowen saw him at 10 that night, he was greatly alarmed. A physician was called in yesterday morning, but he was at that time past all possibility of cure. And Dr. Gibbs and Mr. Bowen had scarcely left his room before he sunk into a sleep from which he never woke. Everything, I trust and believe, was done for him that was possible. It has been very sudden. We had, however, some hours of preparation, and when we understood his recovery to be hopeless, most fervently did we pray for the speedy release which ensued. To have seen him languishing long, struggling for hours, would have been dreadful. And, thank God, we were all spared from it. Except the restlessness and confusion of high fever, he did not suffer, and he was mercifully spared from knowing that he was about to quit the objects so fondly cherished as his wife and children ever were. His tenderness as a father, who can do justice to? My mother is tolerably well, but I fear her health must suffer under such a shock. An express was sent for James, and he arrived here this morning before 8 o'clock. The funeral is to be on Saturday at Walcott Church. The serenity of the corpse is most delightful. It preserves the sweet, benevolent smile which always distinguished him. They kindly press my mother to remove to Steventon as soon as it is all over, but I do not believe she will leave Bath at present. We must have this house for 3 months longer, and here we shall probably stay till the end of that time. We all unite in love, and I am affectionately yours, J.A. January the 29th. My dearest Frank, my mother has found among our dear father's little personal property a small astronomical instrument which she hopes you will accept for his sake. It is, I believe, a compass and sundial, and is in a black shagreen case. Would you have it sent to you now, and with what direction? There is also a pair of scissors for you. We hope these are articles that may be useful to you, but we are sure they will be valuable. I have not time for more. Gay Street, Bath, Tuesday, the 23rd of April. My dearest Cassandra, I am much obliged to you for writing to me again so soon. Your letter yesterday was quite an unexpected pleasure. Poor Mrs. Stent! It has been her lot to be always in the way, but we must be merciful, for perhaps in time we may come to be Mrs. Stent ourselves, unequal to anything and unwelcome to everybody. We shall be very glad to see you whenever you can get away. When I tell you that we have been visiting a countess this morning, you will immediately guess it to be Lady Roden. No, it is Lady Leven. On receiving a message from Lord and Lady Leven through the Mackays declaring their intention of waiting on us, we thought it right to go to them. I hope we have not done too much, but the friends and admirers of Charles must be attended to. They seem very reasonable, good sort of people, very civil and full of his praise. We were shown at first into an empty drawing-room, and presently in came his lordship, not knowing who we were, to apologize for the servant's mistake and to tell a lie himself, that Lady Leven was not within. He is a tall, gentlemanlike looking man, with spectacles and rather deaf. After sitting with him 10 minutes, we walked away, but Lady L, coming out of the dining parlour as we passed the door, we were obliged to attend her back to it and pay our visit over again. By this means we had the pleasure of hearing Charles's praises twice over. Castle Square, Southampton, Wednesday, January the 7th, 1807. My dear Cassandra, I had no idea of hearing from you before Tuesday, and my pleasure yesterday was therefore unhurt by any previous disappointment. A few days ago I had a letter from Miss Irvine, and as I was in her debt, you will guess it to be a remonstrance. The first page is in her usual retrospective, jealous, inconsistent style, but the remainder is chatty and harmless. She supposes my silence may have proceeded from resentment of her not having written to inquire particularly after my whooping cough. She is a funny one. Captain Foote dined with us on Friday, and I fear will not soon venture again, for the strength of our dinner was a boiled leg of mutton, underdone even for James. And Captain Foote has a particular dislike to underdone mutton. But he was so good-humoured and pleasant that I did not much mind his being starved. He gives us all the most cordial invitation to his house in the country. My mother is afraid I have not been explicit enough on the subject of her wealth. She began 1806 with £68. She begins 1807 living in Southampton with £99, and this after £32 purchase of stock. Frank, too, has been settling his accounts and making calculations, and each party feels equal to our present expenses, but much increase of house rent would not do for either. Frank limits himself, I believe, to £400 a year. After seeing Frank skate today, we are to treat ourselves with a passage over the ferry. I hope the frosts will last longer for his sake. He was recognised yesterday by Admiral Bertie, and a few days since arrived the Admiral and his daughter to wait upon us. To the Berties we are to be added the Lances, whose visit Frank and I returned yesterday. We found only Mrs. Lance at home, and whether she boasts any offspring besides a grand pianoforte did not appear. She was civil and chatty enough, and offered to introduce us to some acquaintance in Southampton, which we gratefully declined. I suppose they must be acting by the orders of Mr. Lance of Netherton in his civility, as there seems no other reason for their coming near us. They live in a handsome style and are rich, and she seemed to like to be rich, and we gave her to understand that we were far from being so. She will soon feel, therefore, that we are not worth her acquaintance. Southampton, February the 8th. We are all sorry that your return is to be delayed. Frank and Mary cannot at all approve of your not being at home in time to help them, and desire me to say that if you are not, they shall be as spiteful as possible and choose everything in the style most likely to vex you. Knives that will not cut, glasses that will not hold, a sofa without a seat, and a bookcase without shelves. Our garden is putting in order by a man who bears a remarkably good character, has a very fine complexion, and asks something less than the first. The shrubs which border the gravel walk, he says, are only sweetbriars and roses, and the latter an indifferent sort. We mean to get a few of a better kind, therefore, and at my own particular desire he procures us some syringas. We talk also of a laburnum. The border under the terrace wall is clearing away to receive currants and gooseberry bushes, and a spot is found very proper for raspberries. The alterations and improvements within doors, too, advance very properly, and the offices will be made very convenient indeed. The morning was so wet that I was afraid we should not be able to see our little visitor. But Frank, who could alone go to church, called for her after service, and Fanny is now talking away at my side and examining the treasures of my writing desk drawer. Very happy, I believe. Not at all shy, of course. What has become of all the shyness disappear in the progress of time, and new ones take their place? Shyness and sweating sickness have given way to confidence and paralytic complaints. Our little visitor has just left us, and left us highly pleased with her. She's a nice, natural, open-hearted, affectionate girl, with all the ready civility which one sees in the best children of the present day. So unlike anything I was myself at her age that I am often all astonishment and shame. Half her time here was spent at spillikins, which I consider as a very valuable part of our household furniture. I should not be surprised if we were visited by James again this week. I am sorry and angry that his visits should not give one more pleasure. The company of so good and clever a man ought to be gratifying in itself. But his chat seems all forced. His opinions on many points too much copied from his wife's. And his time here is spent in walking about the house and banging doors or ringing the bell for a glass of water. Gomersham, Kent, Wednesday, the 15th of June, 1808. My dear Cassandra, where shall I begin? At 7:30 yesterday morning, Henry saw us into our own carriage, and we drove away from the London hotel, which, by the by, had been found most uncomfortable, very dirty, very noisy, and very ill-provided. Our first 8 miles were hot. Deptford Hill brought to my mind our hot journey into Kent 14 years ago, but after Blackheath we suffered nothing, and as the day advanced it grew quite cool. At Dartford, which we reached within 2 hours and 3/4, we went to the Bull, and had the same bad butter. Travelling on without any adventures, we reached Sittingbourne by 3. Daniel was watching for us at the door of the George, and I was acknowledged very kindly by Mr. and Mrs. Marshall while Mary went out to buy some gloves. And so off we drove, and by 6 o'clock we were at Gomersham. Our 2 brothers were walking before the house as we approached, as natural as life. Fanny and Lizzie met us in the hall, and with a great deal of pleasant joy we went a few minutes into the breakfast parlour and then proceeded to our rooms. Mary has the hall chamber. I am in the yellow room, very literally, for I am writing in it at this moment. It seems odd to me to have such a great place all to myself, and to be at Gomersham without you is also odd. You are wished for, I assure you. Fanny, who came to me as soon as she had seen her Aunt James to her room, and stayed while I dressed, was as energetic as usual in her longings for you. She is grown both in height and size since last year, but not immoderately, looks very well, and seems, as to conduct and manner, just what she was and what one could wish for. Elizabeth, who was dressing when we arrived, came to me for a minute and gave me a very affectionate welcome. That I had received such from Edward also I need not mention, but I do, because it is a pleasure. I never saw him look in better health. I was agreeably surprised to find Louisa Bridger still here. She looks remarkably well. Legacies are a very wholesome diet, and is just what she always was. You may fancy our dinner party. Fanny, of course, belonging in it, and little Edward for that day. It has struck 10. I must go to breakfast. Thursday, the 30th of June. I give you all joy of Frank's return, which happens in the true sailor way. Just after our being told not to expect him for some weeks, the wind has been very much against him, but I suppose he must be in our neighbourhood by this time. Fanny is in hourly expectation of him. What cold, disagreeable weather ever since Sunday. I dare say you have fires every day. My Spencer is quite the comfort of our evening walks. We want you to send us Anna's height, that we may know whether she is as tall as Fanny. And pray, can you tell me of any little thing that would probably be acceptable to Mrs. Frank Austen? I wish to bring her something. Has she a silver knife? Or would you recommend a brooch? I shall not spend more than half a guinea about it. Edward and Caroline and their mamma have all had the Gomersham cold, the former with sore throat and fever, which his looks are still suffering from. He is very happy here, however, but I believe the little girl will be glad to go home. Her cousins are too much for her. It is now 12:30, and having heard Lizzie read, I am moved down into the library for the sake of a fire, which agreeably surprised us when we assembled at 10, and here in warm and happy solitude proceed to acknowledge this day's letter. Elizabeth talks of going with her 3 girls to Rotham while her husband is in Hampshire. She is improved in looks since we first came, and excepting a cold, does not seem at all unwell. She is considered, indeed, more than usually active for her situation and size. In another week I shall be at home, and then my having been at Gomersham will seem like a dream. The orange wine will want our care soon, but in the meantime, for elegance and ease and luxury, I shall eat ice and drink French wine and be above vulgar economy. Castle Square, Saturday, the 1st of October. Your letter this morning was quite unexpected, and it is well that it brings such good news to counterbalance the disappointment to me of losing my first sentence which I had arranged. We are extremely glad to hear of the birth of Elizabeth's child, and trust everything will proceed as well as it begins. His mamma has our best wishes, and he our second best for health and comfort, though I suppose, unless he has our best too, we will do nothing for her. We are glad it was all over before your arrival at Gomersham, and I am most happy to find who the godmother is to be. My mother was some time guessing the names. Mr. Lifford called on Tuesday to say he was disappointed of his son and daughter's coming, and as I was determined that he should not lose every pleasure, I consulted him on my complaint. He has recommended cotton soaked with oil of sweet almonds, and it has done me good. My mother has undertaken to cure 6 hams for Frank. At first it was a distress, but now it is a pleasure. Your plants were taken in one very cold, blustery day and placed in the dining-room, and there was a frost the very same night. If we are to have warm weather again, they are to be put out of doors. If not, my mother will have them conveyed to her winter quarters. I gather some currants every now and then, when I want either fruit or employment. Pray, tell my little goddaughter that I am delighted to hear of her saying her lessons so well. Friday, the 7th of October. Your letter on Tuesday gave us great pleasure, and we congratulate you all on Elizabeth's hitherto happy recovery. Tomorrow or Sunday I hope to hear of its advancing in the same style. The masons are now repairing the chimney, which they found in such a state as to make it wonderful that it should have stood so long, and next to impossible that another violent wind should not blow it down. We may therefore thank you perhaps for saving us from being thumped with old bricks. On Tuesday evening, Southampton was in a good deal of alarm for about an hour. A fire broke out soon after 9 at Webb's, the pastry cook, and burnt for some time with great fury. I cannot learn exactly how it originated. At the time it was said to be their bakehouse, but now I hear it was in the back of their dwelling house, and that one room was consumed. The flames were considerable. They seemed about as near to us as those at Lyme, and to reach higher. One could not but feel uncomfortable, and I began to think of what I should do if it came to the worst. Happily, however, the night was perfectly still. The engines were immediately in use, and before 10 the fire was nearly extinguished, though it was 12 before everything was considered safe, and a guard was kept the whole night. I am greatly pleased with your account of Fanny. I found her in the summer just as you describe, almost another sister, and could not have supposed that a niece would ever have been so much to me. She is quite after one's own heart. Give her my best love and tell her that I always think of her with pleasure. The 13th of October. I have received your letter, and with most melancholy anxiety was it expected. For the sad news of Elizabeth's death reached us last night, but without any particulars. We do feel for you all, as you will not need to be told. For you, for Fanny, for Henry, for Lady Bridges, and for dearest Edward, whose loss and whose sufferings seem to make those of every other person nothing. God be praised that he has a religious mind to bear him up, and a disposition that will gradually lead him to comfort. My dear, dear Fanny, I am so thankful that she has you with her. May the Almighty sustain you all, and keep you, my dearest Cassandra, well. But for the present, I dare say you are equal to everything. We need not enter into a panegyric on the departed, but it is sweet to think of her great worth, of her solid principles, her true devotion, her excellence in every relation of life. It is also consolatory to reflect on the shortness of the sufferings which led her from this world to a better. Farewell for the present, my dearest sister. Tell Edward that we feel for him and pray for him. Saturday night, the 15th of October. Your accounts make us as comfortable as we can expect to be at such a time. Edward's loss is terrible and must be felt as such, and these are too early days, indeed, to think of moderation and grief either in him or his afflicted daughter. But soon we may hope that our dear Fanny's sense of duty will rouse her to exertion. For his sake, and as the most acceptable proof of love to the spirit of her departed mother, she will try to be tranquil and resigned. Does she feel you to be a comfort to her, or is she too much overpowered for anything but solitude? Your account of Lizzie is very interesting. Poor child. One must hope the impression will be strong, and yet one's heart aches for a dejected mind of 8 years old. I suppose you see the corpse. How does it appear? We are anxious to be assured that Edward will not attend the funeral, but when it comes to the point, I think he must feel it impossible. Dearest Fanny must now look upon herself as his prime source of comfort, his dearest friend, as the being who is gradually to supply him, to the extent that is possible, what he lost. This consideration will elevate and cheer her. Adieu. You cannot write too often. We are heartily rejoiced that the poor baby gives you no particular anxiety. Kiss dear Lizzie for me. Monday, the 24th of October. Little Edward and George came to us soon after 7 on Saturday. Very well, but very cold, having by choice travelled on the outside, and with no great coat, but what Mr. Wise, the coachman, good-naturedly spread them of his as they sat by his side. They behave extremely well in every respect, showing quite as much feeling as one wishes to see, and on every occasion speaking of their father with the liveliest affection. His letter was read over by them yesterday, and with many tears. George sobbed aloud. Edward's tears do not flow so easily, but as far as I can judge, they are both very properly impressed by what has happened. George is almost a new acquaintance to me, and I find him in a different way as engaging as Edward. We do not want amusement, cup and ball, at which George is indefatigable, spillikins, paper ships, riddles, conundrums and cards, with watching the flow and ebb of the river, and now and then a stroll out, keeps us well employed, and we mean to avail ourselves of our kind papa's consideration by not returning to Winchester till the evening of Wednesday. As to your lengthened stay, it is no more than I expected, and what must be, but you cannot suppose I like it. All that you say of our brother is truly comfortable. I began to fear that when the bustle of the first week was over, his spirits might for a time be more depressed, and perhaps one must still expect something of the kind. If you escape a bilious attack, I shall wonder almost as much as rejoice. Everything you say about Chawton in your letter will, I am sure, as soon as I am able to read it to her, make my mother consider the plan with more and more pleasure. There are 6 bedchambers. Henry wrote to her the other day and luckily mentioned the number, which is just what we wanted to be assured of. He speaks also of garrets for store places, one of which she immediately planned fitting up for Edward's manservant, for she is already quite reconciled to our keeping one. His name shall be Robert, if you please. Everybody is very concerned at our going away, and everybody is acquainted with Chawton, and speaks of it as a remarkably pretty village, and everybody knows the house we described. But nobody fixes on the right one. Our ball was rather more amusing than I expected. Martha liked it very much, and I did not gape till the last quarter of an hour. The room was tolerably full, and there were perhaps 30 couple of dancers. The melancholy part was to see so many dozen young women standing by without partners, and each of them with 2 ugly naked shoulders. It was the same room in which we danced 15 years ago. I thought it all over, and in spite of the shame of being so much older, felt with thankfulness that I was quite as happy now as then. We paid an additional shilling for our tea, which we took as we chose in an adjoining room. You will not expect to hear that I was asked to dance, but I was, by that gentleman whom we met that Sunday with Captain Dauvergne. We have always kept up a bowing acquaintance since, and being pleased with his black eyes, I spoke to him at the ball, which brought on his civility. But I do not know his name, and he seems so little at home in the English language that I believe his black eyes may be the best of him. We want to be settled at Chawton in time for Henry to come to us for some shooting, in October at least, but a little earlier, and Edward may visit us after taking his boys back to Winchester. Suppose we name the 4th of September. Will that not do? Chawton, Tuesday, 24th of January, 1809. I do not require you to write again before Sunday, provided I may believe you and your finger going on quite well. Take care of your precious self. Do not work too hard. Remember that Aunt Cassandra's are scarce. I had the happiness yesterday of a letter from Charles, written at Bermuda on the 7th of December. All well. He had taken a small prize in his last cruise, a French schooner laden with sugar, but bad weather parted them, and she had not yet been heard of. My September letter was the latest he had received. You rejoice me by what you say of Fanny. We thought and talked of her yesterday with sincere affection, and wished her a long enjoyment of all the happiness to which she seems born. While she gives happiness to those about her, she's pretty sure of her own share. I am gratified by her having pleasure in what I write, but I wish the knowledge of my being exposed to her discerning criticism may not hurt my style by inducing too great a solicitude. I begin already to weigh my words and sentences more than I did, and am looking about for a sentiment, an illustration, or a metaphor in every corner of the room. Could my ideas flow as fast as the rain in the store closet, it would be charming. We have been in 2 or 3 dreadful states within the last week from the melting snow, etc., and the contest between us and the closet has now ended in our defeat. I have been obliged to move almost everything out and leave it to splash itself as it likes. To Crosby and Company. Gentlemen, in the spring of the year 1803, a manuscript novel in 2 volumes entitled Susan was sold to you by a gentleman of the name of Seymour, and the purchase money, £10, received at the same time. 6 years have since passed, and this work, of which I avow myself the authoress, has never, to the best of my knowledge, appeared in print, though an early publication was stipulated for at the time of sale. I can only account for such an extraordinary circumstance by supposing the manuscript, by some carelessness, to have been lost. And if that is the case, am willing to supply you with another copy, if you are disposed to avail yourself of it, and will engage for no further delay when it comes into your hands. It will not be in my power to command this copy before the month of August, but then, if you accept my proposal, you may depend on receiving it. Be so good as to send me a line in answer as soon as possible, as my stay in this place will not exceed a few days. Should no notice be taken of this address, I shall feel myself at liberty to secure the publication of my work by applying elsewhere. I am, gentlemen, etc. Crosby and Company, Stationers' Hall Court, London, Saturday, the 8th of April, 1809. Madam, we have to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of the 5th inst. It is true that at the time mentioned we purchased of Mr. Seymour a manuscript novel entitled Susan, and paid for it the sum of £10, for which we have his stamped receipt for a full consideration. But there was not any time stipulated for its publication, neither are we bound to publish it. Should you or anyone else attempt it, we shall take proceedings to stop the sale. The manuscript shall be yours for the same as we paid for it. I am yours, etc., Richard Crosby. Sloane Street, London, Thursday, the 18th of April, 1811. I have so many little matters to tell you of that I cannot wait any longer before I begin to put them down. I am sorry to tell you that I am getting very extravagant and spending all my money. And what is worse for you, I have been spending yours too. For in a linen draper's shop, to which I went for checked muslin, and for which I was obliged to give 7 shillings a yard, I was tempted by a pretty coloured muslin, and bought 10 yards of it, on the chance of your liking it. But at the same time, if it should not suit you, you must not think yourself at all obliged to take it. Tonight I might have been at the play. Henry had kindly planned our going together to the Lyceum, but I have a cold which I should not like to make worse before Saturday. The day of the party is settled. About 80 people are invited, and there is to be some very good music. 5 professionals, 3 of them glee singers, besides amateurs. Fanny will listen to this. One of the hirelings is a capital on the harp, from which I expect great pleasure. How are you as to health, strength, looks, stomach, etc.? I had a very comfortable account from Chawton yesterday. If the weather permits, Eliza and I walk into London tomorrow. She is in want of chimney lights, and I of an ounce of darning cotton. She has resolved not to venture to the play tonight. The D'Entraigues and Comte Julien cannot come to the party, which was at first a grief, but she has since supplied herself so well with performers that it is of no consequence. Their not coming has produced our going to them tomorrow evening, which I like the idea of. It will be amusing to see the ways of a French circle. No, indeed, I am never too busy to think of sense and sensibility. I can no more forget it than a mother can forget her suckling child, and I am much obliged to you for your inquiries. I have had 2 sheets to correct, but the last only brings us to Willoughby's first appearance. Mrs. Knight regrets in the most flattering manner that she must wait till May, but I have scarcely a hope of its being out in June. Henry does not neglect it. He has hurried to the printer and says he will see him again today. The incomes remain as they were, but I will get them altered if I can. I am very much gratified by Mrs. K's interest in it, and sincerely wish her curiosity could be satisfied sooner than is now probable. I think she will like my Eleanor, but cannot build on anything else. Thursday, the 25th of April. Our party went off extremely well. The rooms were dressed up with flowers and looked very pretty. A glass for the mantelpiece was lent, and the festivities began with a very fine pair of soles. At 7:30 arrived the musicians in 2 hackney coaches, and by 8 the lordly company began to appear. The drawing-room being soon hotter than we liked, we placed ourselves in the connecting passage, which was comparatively cool, and gave us all the advantage of the music at the pleasant distance, as well as the first view of every newcomer. I was quite surrounded by acquaintance, especially gentlemen. Including everybody, we were 66, which was considerably more than Eliza had expected, and quite enough to fill the back drawing-room and leave a few scattered about. The music was extremely good. Between the songs were lessons in the harp, or harp and pianoforte together. There was one female singer, a short Miss Davis, all in blue, whose voice was said to be very fine indeed, and all the performers gave great satisfaction by doing what they were paid for, and giving themselves no airs. The house was not clear till after 12. Your lilacs are in leaf. Ours are in bloom. The horse chestnuts are quite out, and the elms almost. I had a pleasant walk in Kensington Gardens on Sunday with Henry. Everything was fresh and beautiful. We did go to the play, after all, on Saturday, to the Lyceum, and saw The Hypocrite, an old play taken from Molière's Tartuffe, and were well entertained. I have no chance of seeing Mrs. Siddons. She did act on Monday, but as Henry was told by the box-keeper that he did not think she would, the places were given up. Eliza's party is mentioned in this morning's paper. Chawton, Thursday, the 6th of June. My dear Cassandra, on Monday I had the pleasure of receiving, unpacking, and approving our Wedgwood ware. It all came very safely, and upon the whole is a good match, though I think they might have allowed us rather larger leaves, especially in such a year of fine foliage as this. One is apt to suppose that the woods about Birmingham must be blighted. There was no bill with the goods, but that shall not screen them from being paid. I mean to ask Martha to settle the account. It will be quite in her way, for she is just now sending my mother a breakfast set from the same place. I hope it will come by the wagon tomorrow. It is certainly just what we want, and I long to know what it is like. We have considerable dealings with the wagons at present. A hamper of port and brandy from Southampton is now in the kitchen. We began peas on Sunday, but our gatherings are very small. Yesterday I had an agreeable surprise of finding several scarlet strawberries quite ripe. Had you been at home, this would have been a pleasure lost. There are more gooseberries and fewer currants than I thought at first. We must buy currants for our wine. Chawton, Sunday, the 29th of November, 1812. My dear Martha, Pride and Prejudice is sold. Egerton gives £110 for it. I would rather have had £150, but we could not both be pleased, and I am not at all surprised that he should not choose to hazard so much. Its being sold will, I hope, be a great saving of trouble to Henry, and therefore must be welcome to me. The money is to be paid at the end of the 12-month. Poor Mrs. Stent, I hope, will not much longer be a distress to anybody. All of you that are well enough to look are now passing your judgments, I suppose, on Mrs. John Butler, and is she pretty, or is she not, is the knotty question. Happy woman, to stand the gaze of a neighbourhood as the bride of such a pink-faced, simple young man. Chawton, Sunday, the 24th of January, 1813. My dear Cassandra, we have had no letter from you since you went away, and no visitor except Miss Benn, but we have received the half of an excellent Stilton cheese, we presume from Henry. My mother is very well, and finds great amusement in the glove knitting. We are quite run over with books. She has got Sir John Carr's Travels in Spain, and I am reading an essay on the military police and institutions of the British Empire by Captain Paisley of the Engineers, a book which I protested against at first, but which, upon trial, I find delightfully written and highly entertaining. I want to tell you that I have got my own darling child from London. On Wednesday I received one copy of Pride and Prejudice, sent down by Faulkner, with 3 lines from Henry to say he had given another to Charles and sent a 3rd by the coach to Gomersham. I wrote to him immediately to beg for my 2 other sets. By your account, however, he was gone before my letter was written. The only evil is the delay. Nothing can be more done till his return. For your sake, I am as well pleased that it should be so, as it might be unpleasant to you to be in the neighbourhood at the first burst of the business. The advertisement is in our paper today for the first time. I shall write to Frank that he may not think himself neglected. Miss Benn dined with us on the very day of the book's coming, and in the evening We set fairly at it and read half the first volume to her, and I believe it passed with her unsuspected. She was amused, poor soul, that she could not help, with two such people to lead the way, but she really does seem to admire Elizabeth Bennet. I must confess that I think her as delightful a creature as ever appeared in print, and how I shall be able to tolerate those who do not like her I do not know. There are a few typical errors, and a said he or a said she would sometimes make the dialogue more immediately clear, but I do not write for such dull elves. The second volume is shorter than I could wish, but the difference is not so much in reality as in look, there being a large proportion of narrative in that part. I have lopped and cropped so successfully, however, that I imagine it must be rather shorter than Sense and Sensibility altogether. Thursday, the 4th of February. Your letter was truly welcome, and I am much obliged to you for your praise. It came at a right time, for I had some fits of disgust, and our second evening's reading to Miss Benn had not pleased me so well, but I believe something must be attributed to my mother's too rapid way of getting on, and though she perfectly understands the characters herself, she cannot speak as they ought. Upon the whole, however, I am quite vain enough and well satisfied enough. The work is rather too light and bright and sparkling. It wants shade. It wants to be stretched out here and there with a long chapter, of sense if it could be had, if not of solemn, specious nonsense, about something unconnected with the story, an essay on writing, a critique on Walter Scott, or the history of Bonaparte, or anything that would form a contrast and bring the reader with increased delight to the playfulness and epigrammatism of the general style. I doubt you're quite agreeing with me here. I know your starched notions. The caution observed at Steventon with regard to the possession of the book is an agreeable surprise to me, and I heartily wish it may be the means of saving you from everything unpleasant. But you must be prepared for the neighbourhood being perhaps already informed of there being such a work in the world, and in the Chawton world. The 9th of February. I am exceedingly pleased that you can say what you do after having gone through the whole work, and Fanny's praise is very gratifying. My hopes were tolerably strong of her, but nothing like a certainty. Her liking Darcy and Elizabeth is enough. Sloane Street, the 24th of May. I am very much obliged to you for writing to me. I went to Leighton's and got my mother's gown, 7 yards at 6 and 6pence. I then walked into number 10, Henrietta Street, which is all dirt and confusion, but in a very promising way, and afterwards went with Henry to the exhibition in Spring Gardens. It is not thought a good collection, but I was very well pleased, particularly, pray tell Fanny, with a small portrait of Mrs. Bingley, excessively like her. I went in hopes of seeing one of her sister, but there was no Mrs. Darcy. Perhaps, however, I may find her in the great exhibition, which we shall go to if we have time. I have no chance of her in the collection of Sir Joshua Reynolds' paintings, which is now showing in Pall Mall, and which we are also to visit. Mrs. Bingley is exactly herself, size, shaped face, features, and sweetness. She is dressed in a white gown with green ornaments, which convinces me of what I always supposed, that green was a favourite colour with her. I dare say Mrs. D. will be in yellow. I am very much obliged to Fanny for her letter. It made me laugh heartily, but I cannot pretend to answer it. Even if I had more time, I should not feel at all sure of the sort of letter that Miss Darcy would write. Monday evening. We have been both to the exhibition and Sir Joshua Reynolds, and I am disappointed, for there is nothing like Mrs. D. at either. I can only imagine that Mr. Darcy prizes any picture of her too much to like it exposed to the public eye. I can imagine he would have that sort of feeling, that mixture of love, pride, and delicacy. Setting this aside, I had great amusement among the pictures and the driving about. The carriage being open was very pleasant. I liked my solitary elegance very much, and was ready to laugh all the time at my being where I was. I could not but feel that I had naturally small right to be parading about London in a barouche. I shall be quiet tomorrow morning. Chawton, the 6th of July. To Captain Austen, HMS Elephant, Baltic. My dearest Frank, behold me going to write you as handsome a letter as I can. Wish me good luck. It must be real enjoyment to you, since you are obliged to leave England to be where you are, seeing something of a new country, and one that has been so distinguished as Sweden. I hope you have gone to Karlskrona. Charles XII, Christiana, and Linnaeus. Do their ghosts rise up before you? July begins unpleasantly with us, cold and showery. But it is often a baddish month. We had some fine, dry weather preceding it, which was very acceptable to the holders of hay and the masters of meadows. In general, it must have been a good haymaking season. Edward has got in all his in excellent order. I speak only of Chawton. But here he has had better luck than Mr. Middleton ever had in 5 years that he was tenant. Good encouragement for him to come again, and I really hope he will do so another year. The pleasure to us of having them here is so great that if we were not the best creatures in the world, we should not deserve it. We go on in the most comfortable way, very frequently dining together and always meeting in some part of the day. He will soon have all his children about him. Edward, George, and Charles are collected already, and another week brings Henry and William. You will be glad to hear that every copy of Sense and Sensibility is sold, and that it has brought me £140, besides the copyright, if that should ever be of any value. I have now therefore written myself into £250, which only makes me long for more. I have something in hand, which I hope, on the credit of Pride and Prejudice, will sell well, though not half so entertaining. And, by the by, shall you object to my mentioning the Elephant in it, and 2 or 3 other of your old ships? I have done, but it shall not stay to make you angry. They're only just mentioned. Henrietta Street, London, Wednesday, 8:30, the 16th of September. Dearest Cassandra, I am going to write nothing but short sentences. There shall be 2 full stops in every line. We feel more and more how much we have to do, and how little time. This house looks very nice. It seems like Sloane Street removed here. Lady Robert Carr is delighted with Pride and Prejudice, and really was so, I understand, before she knew who wrote it. Henry told her with as much satisfaction as if it were my wish. He did not tell me this, but he told Fanny. Let me be rational and return to my 2 full stops. I talked to Henry at the play last night. We were in a private box, which made it more pleasant. The box is directly on the stage. One is infinitely less fatigued than in the common way. Fanny and the 2 little girls are gone to take places for tonight at Covent Garden, Clandestine Marriage and Midas. The latter will be a fine show for Lizzie and Marianne. They revelled last night in Don Juan, whom we left in hell at 11:30. We had Scaramouche and a ghost, and were delighted. I speak of them. My delight was very tranquil. Miss Hare had some pretty caps, and is to make me one, white satin with lace, and a little white flower perking out of the left ear. My gown is to be trimmed everywhere with white ribbon, plaited on somehow or other. They trim with white very much. I learned from Mrs. Tricker's young lady, to my amusement, that the stays are now not made to force the bosom up at all. That was a very unbecoming, unnatural fashion. I was really glad to hear that they are not going to be so much off the shoulder as they were. Going to Mr. Spence was a sad business and cost us many tears. Unluckily, we were obliged to go a second time before he could do more than just look. And alas, we are to go again tomorrow. Lizzie is not finished yet. There have been no teeth taken out, but he finds hers in a very bad state. They have all been cleaned, hers filed, and are to be filed again. There's a very sad hole between 2 of her front teeth. Thursday, after dinner. The poor girls and their teeth. Marianne had 2 taken out after all, the 2 just beyond the eye teeth, to make room for those in front. When her doom was fixed, Fanny, Lizzie, and I walked into the next room, where we heard each of the 2 sharp, hasty screams. Fanny's teeth were cleaned too, and pretty as they are, Spence found something to do to them, putting in gold and talking gravely, making a considerable point of seeing her again before the winter. I would not have him look at mine for a shilling a tooth. We then went to Wedgwood's, where my brother and Fanny chose a dinner set. I believe the pattern is a small lozenge in purple between lines of narrow gold, and is to have the crest. Gomersham Park, Wednesday, the 3rd of November. As my pen seems inclined to write large, I will put my lines very close together. I had but just time to enjoy your letter yesterday before Edward and I set off for Canterbury, and I allowed him to hear the chief of it as we went along. We had a delightful morning for our drive. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but the day turned off and we came home in some rain. He went to inspect the jail as a visiting magistrate and took me with him. I was gratified and went through all the feelings which people must go through, I think, in visiting such a building. We paid no other visits, only walked about snugly together and shopped. I bought a concert ticket and a sprig of flowers for my old age. I took up your letter again to refresh me, being somewhat tired, and was struck with the prettiness of the hand, so small and so neat. I wish I could get as much into a sheet of paper. Another time I will take 2 days to make a letter in. It is fatiguing to write a whole long one at once. I am all alone. Edward has gone into his woods. At this present time I have 5 tables, 28 chairs, and 2 fires all to myself. I am glad William's going is voluntary, and on no worse grounds. An inclination for the country is a venal fault. He has more of Cowper than of Johnson in him, fonder of tame hares and blank verse than of the tide of human existence at Charing Cross. Oh, I have more of such sweet flattery from Miss Sharp. She is an excellent kind of friend. I am read and admired in Ireland too. There is a Mrs. Fletcher, the wife of a judge, an old lady and very good and clever, who is all curiosity to know about me, what I am like, and so forth. I am not known to her by name, however. I do not despair of having my picture in the exhibition at last, all white and red, with my head on one side. In the meantime, I shall owe dear Henry a great deal of money for printing, etc. I hope Mrs. Fletcher will indulge herself with Sense and Sensibility. Sunday, the 6th of November. Since I wrote last, the 2nd edition of Pride and Prejudice has stared me in the face. Mary tells me that Eliza means to buy it. I wish she may. I cannot help hoping that many will find themselves obliged to buy it. I shall not mind imagining it a disagreeable duty to them, so as they do it. Mary heard before she left home that it was very much admired at Cheltenham. I cannot tire you, I am sure, on this subject, or I would apologize. I have extended my lights and increased my acquaintance a good deal within these 2 days. Lady Honeywood, you know, I did not sit near enough to be a perfect judge, but I thought her extremely pretty, and her manners have all the recommendations of ease and good humour and unaffectedness. And going about with 4 horses and nicely dressed herself, she's altogether a perfect sort of woman. Henrietta Street, Wednesday, the 2nd of March, 1814. On reaching Guildford, we found that John and the horses were gone on. We therefore sat in the carriage while fresh horses were put in, and proceeded directly to Cobham, which we reached about 7, and by 8 were sitting down to a very nice roast fowl. We did not begin reading Mansfield Park till Bentley Green. Henry's approbation hitherto is even equal to my wishes. He says it is very different from the other two, but does not appear to think it at all inferior. I am afraid he has gone through the most entertaining part. He gives great praise to the drawing of the characters, understands them all, likes Fanny, and I think foresees how it will all be. We went to bed at 10. I was very tired, but slept to a miracle, and am lovely today. We left Cobham at 8:30, stopped to breakfast at Kingston, and were in this house considerably before 2, quite in the style of Mr. Knight. Nice, smiling Mr. Barlow met us at the door, and in reply to inquiries after news, said the peace was generally expected. I have taken possession of my bedroom, unpacked my bandbox, been visited by Madame Bijon, and am now writing by myself at the new table in the front room. It is snowing. Places are secured at Drury Lane for Saturday, but so great is the rage for seeing Kean that only a third and fourth row could be got. As it is in a front box, however, I hope we shall do pretty well. Shylock, a good play for Fanny. Henry is going on with Mansfield Park. He admires H. Crawford, I mean properly, as a clever, pleasant young man. I tell you all the good I can, as I know how much you will enjoy it. We hear that Mr. Kean is more admired than ever. There are no good places to be got in Drury Lane for the next fortnight, but Henry means to secure some for Saturday fortnight, when you are reckoned upon. Saturday. I have read The Corsair, mended my petticoat, and have nothing to do. Getting out is impossible, nothing but thickness and sleet. And though these 2 rooms are delightfully warm, I fancy it is very cold abroad. Young Wyndham is such a nice, gentlemanlike, unaffected sort of young man that I think he may do for Fanny. He had a sensible, quiet look which one likes. I was speaking to Madame Bijon this morning about a boiled loaf, when it appears her master has no raspberry jam. She has some, which of course she is determined he shall have. But cannot you bring him a pot when you come? Sunday. I find a little time before breakfast for writing. It was considerably past 4 when they arrived yesterday. The roads were so very bad. As it was, they had 4 horses from Cranford Bridge. Fanny was miserably cold at first, but she and Edward both seem well. We were quite satisfied with Kean. I cannot imagine better acting, but the part was too short. And excepting him and Miss Smith, and she did not quite answer my expectation, the parts were ill-filled and the play heavy. We were too much tired to stay for the whole of Illusion, which has 3 acts. There's a great deal of finery and dancing in it, but I think it has little merit. I should like to see Kean again excessively, and to see him with you too. It appeared to me as if there were no fault in him anywhere, and in his scene with Tubal there was exquisite acting. A cold day, but bright and clean. I'm afraid your planting can hardly have begun. I am sorry to hear there has been a rise in the price of tea. I do not mean to pay Twining till later, when we may order a fresh supply. A great many pretty caps in the windows of Cranbourne Alley. I hope when you come we shall both be tempted. I have been ruining myself in black satin ribbon with a proper pearl edge, and now I am trying to draw it up into kind of roses instead of putting it in plain double plaits. Edward desired his love and gives you notice of the arrival of a study table for himself. It ought to be at Chawton this week. He begs you to be so good as to have it inquired for and fetched by the cart, but wishes it not to be unpacked till he is on the spot himself. Wednesday. Well, we went to the play again last night, and as we were out a great part of the morning too, shopping and seeing the Indian jugglers, I am very glad to be quiet now till dressing time. The Farmer's Wife is a musical thing in 3 acts, and as Edward was steady in not staying for anything more, we were at home before 10. Fanny and Mr. J. Plumptre are delighted with Miss Stevens, and her merit in singing is, I dare say, very great. That she gave me no pleasure is no reflection upon her. All that I am sensible of in Miss S. is a pleasing person and no skill in acting. I wear my gauze gown today, long sleeves and all. I shall see how they succeed. I have lowered the bosom, especially at the corners, and plaited black satin ribbon round the top. Prepare for a play the very first evening. I rather think Covent Garden, to see Young in Richard III. Henry has finished Mansfield Park, and his approbation has not lessened. He found the last half of the last volume extremely interesting. I suppose my mother recollects that she gave me no money for paying Twining, and my funds will not supply enough. Chawton, the 18th of November. I feel quite doubtful, my dearest Fanny, as to when my letter may be finished, for I can command very little quiet at present. But yet I must begin, for I know you will be glad to hear as soon as possible, and I really am impatient myself to be writing on so very interesting a subject. I have no scruple in saying that you cannot be in love. My dear Fanny, I am ready to laugh at the idea. And yet it is no laughing matter to have had you so mistaken in your feelings. And with all my heart I wish I had cautioned you when first you spoke to me. But though I did not think you then so much in love as you thought yourself, I did consider you as being attached in a degree quite sufficiently for happiness, as I had no doubt it would increase with opportunity. But you are certainly not at all. There is no concealing it. What strange creatures we are. My dearest Fanny, I am writing what will not be of the smallest use to you. I am feeling different every moment, and shall not be able to suggest a single thing that can assist your mind. I could lament in one sentence and laugh in the next, but as to opinion or counsel, dear Fanny, your mistake has been one that thousands of women fall into. John Plumtree was the first young man who attached himself to you. That was the charm, and most powerful it is. Among the multitudes that make the same mistake, there can be few indeed who have so little reason to regret it. His character and his attachment leave you nothing to be ashamed of. His situation in life, family, friends, and above all his character, amiable mind, strict principles, good habits, all that is really of the first importance, pleads his case most strongly. And now, my dear Fanny, I shall turn round and entreat you not to commit yourself further. Do not think of accepting him unless you really do like him. Anything is to be preferred or endured rather than marrying without affection. And if his deficiencies of manner, etc., strike you more than all his good qualities, give him up at once. I have no doubt of his suffering a good deal for a time, but it is no creed of mine that such sort of disappointments kill anybody. You will be glad to hear that the first edition of Mansfield Park is all sold. Your Uncle Henry is rather wanting me to come to town to settle about a second edition, but as I could not very conveniently leave home now, I have written him my will and pleasure, and unless he still urges me, shall not go. I am very greedy, and want to make the most of it. But as you are much above caring about money, I shall not plague you with any particulars. The pleasures of vanity are more within your comprehension, and you will enter into mine at receiving the praise which every now and then comes to me. 23 Hans Place, London, the 30th of November. I am very much obliged to you, my dear Fanny, for your letter, and I hope you will write again soon, that I may know you to be safe and happy at home. Your affection gives me the highest pleasure, but indeed you must not let anything depend on my opinion. Your own feelings and none but your own should determine such an important point. You will think me perverse, perhaps. In my last letter I was urging everything in his favour, and now I am inclining the other way, but I cannot help it. When I consider how few young men you have yet seen much of, how capable you are of being really in love, and how full of temptation the next 6 or 7 years of your life will probably be, it is the very period of life for the strongest attachments to be formed. I cannot wish you to devote yourself to him. The unpleasantness of appearing fickle is certainly great, but nothing can be compared to the misery of being bound without love, bound to one and preferring another. That is a punishment which you do not deserve. Thank you, but it is not settled yet whether I do hazard a second edition. People are more ready to borrow and praise than buy, which I cannot wonder at. But though I like praise as well as anybody, I like what Edward calls pewter, too. Tuesday, the 17th of October, 1815. My dear Cassandra, thank you for your 2 letters. I am very glad the new cook begins so well. Good apple pies are a considerable part of our domestic happiness. Mr. Murray's letter has come. He is a rogue, of course, but a civil one. He offers £450, but wants the copyright of Mansfield Park, and Sense and Sensibility included. It will end in my publishing for myself, I dare say. He sends more praise, however, than I expected. It is an amusing letter, and you shall see it. The 17th of October, and summer still. Henry is not quite well. A bilious attack with fever. He came back early from Henrietta Street yesterday and went to bed. He is camomiling, and therefore in a way to be better tomorrow. Wednesday. Henry's illness is more serious than I expected. It is a fever, something bilious but chiefly inflammatory. I'm not alarmed, but I have determined to send this letter today, that you may know how things are going on. Mr. Hayden is the apothecary from the corner of Sloane Street, a young man said to be very clever, and he is certainly very attentive, and appears to have understood the complaint. There is a little pain in the chest, but it is not considered of any consequence. Mr. H. took 20 ounces of blood from Henry last night, and nearly as much this morning, and expects to have to bleed him again tomorrow, but he assured me that he found him quite as much better today as he expected. Henry is an excellent patient, lies quietly in bed, and is ready to swallow anything. He lives upon medicine, tea and barley water. You must fancy him in the back room upstairs, and I am generally there also, working or writing. The 3rd of November, to John Murray. Sir, my brother's severe illness has prevented his replying to yours of October the 15th on the subject of the manuscript of Emma, now in your hands. And as he is, though recovering, still in a state which we are fearful of harassing by business, and I am at the same time desirous of coming to some decision on the affair in question, I must request the favour of you to call on me here on any day that may suit you best, at any hour in the evening or any in the morning except from 11 to 1. A short conversation may perhaps do more than much writing. I am, sir, your obedient, humble servant, Jane Austen. Wednesday, the 15th of November, to James Stanier, Clerk. Sir, I must take the liberty of asking you a question. Among the many flattering attentions which I received from you at Carlton House on Monday last was the information of my being at liberty to dedicate any future work to His Royal Highness the Prince Regent, without the necessity of any solicitation on my part. But as I am very anxious to be quite certain of what was intended, I entreat you to have the goodness to inform me how such a permission is to be understood, and whether it is incumbent on me to show my sense of the honour by inscribing the work now in the press to His Royal Highness. I should be equally concerned to appear either presumptuous or ungrateful. I am, etc. The 24th of November. My dearest Cassandra, I have the pleasure of sending you a much better account of my affairs, which I know will be a great delight to you. I wrote to Mr. Murray myself yesterday, and Henry wrote at the same time to Roweth, the printers. Before the notes were out of the house, I received 3 proof sheets and an apology from Roweth. I had a most civil reply from Mr. M. He is so very polite indeed that it is quite overcoming. The printers have been waiting for paper. The blame is thrown upon the stationer, but he gives his word that I shall have no further cause for dissatisfaction. He has lent us Scott on Paris and says that any book of his will always be at my service. In short, I am soothed and complimented into tolerable comfort. We are not to have the trouble of returning the proof sheets to Mr. Murray any longer. The printer's boys bring and carry. The 11th of December, to John Murray. Dear Sir, as I find that Emma is advertised for publication as early as Saturday next, I think it best to lose no time in settling all that remains to be settled on the subject, and adopt this method of doing so, as involving the smallest tax on your time. In the first place, I beg you to understand that I leave the terms on which the trade should be supplied with the work entirely to your judgment. I shall be satisfied with whatever you feel to be best. The title page must be Emma, dedicated by permission to His Royal Highness the Prince Regent, and it is my particular wish that one set should be completed and sent to His Royal Highness 2 or 3 days before the work is generally public. It should be sent under cover to the Reverend J.S. Clark, Librarian, Carlton House. I shall subjoin a list of those persons to whom I must trouble you to forward also a set each when the work is out, with "From the Authoress" in the first page. I return you with very many thanks the books you have so obligingly supplied me with. I am very sensible of the attention you have paid to my convenience and amusement. I return also Mansfield Park, as ready for a second edition, I believe, as I can make it. I am in Hans Place till the 16th. From that day my direction will be Chawton, Alton, Hants. Monday, the 11th of December. To John Murray. Dear Sir, I am much obliged by yours, and am very happy to feel everything arranged to our mutual satisfaction. As to my direction about the title page, it was arising from my ignorance only, and from my never having noticed the proper place for a dedication. I thank you for putting me right. Any deviation from what is usually done in such cases is the last thing I should wish for. I feel happy in having a friend to save me from the ill effect of my own blunder. Chawton, Monday, the 1st of April, 1816. To James Stanier Clark. I am honoured by the Prince's thanks, and very much obliged to yourself for the kind manner in which you mentioned the work. You are very, very kind in your hints as to the sort of composition which might recommend me at present, and I am fully sensible that an historical romance, founded on the house of Saxe-Coburg, might be much more to the purpose of profit or popularity than such pictures of domestic life in country villages as I deal in. But I could no more write a romance than an epic poem. I could not sit seriously down to write a serious romance under any other motivation than to save my life, and if it were indispensable for me to keep it up and never relax into laughing at myself or other people, I am sure I should be hung before I had finished the first chapter. No, I must keep to my own style and go on in my own way, and though I may never succeed again in that, I am convinced that I should totally fail in any other. Sunday, the 8th of September. My dearest Cassandra, no morning service today, wherefore I am writing between 12 and 1 o'clock. Mr. Ben in the afternoon, and likewise more rain again by the look and sound of things. Mrs. Frank Austen seldom looks or appears quite well. Little embryo is troublesome, I suppose. They dined with us yesterday. Our day at Alton was very pleasant. Venison, quite right. Children, well behaved. And Mr. and Mrs. Digweed taking kindly to our charades and other games. We had a beautiful walk home by moonlight. Thank you. My back has given me scarcely any pain for many days. I have an idea that agitation does it as much harm as fatigue, and that I was ill at the time of your going, from the very circumstance of your going. I am nursing myself now into as beautiful a state as I can. I enjoyed Edward's company very much, and yet I was not sorry when Friday came. It had been a busy week, and I wanted a few days' quiet and exemption from the thought and contrivances which any sort of company gives. How good Mrs. West could have written such books and collected so many hard words with all her family cares is a matter of astonishment. Composition seems to me impossible with a head full of joints of mutton and doses of rhubarb. We hear now there is to be no honey this year. Bad news for us. Chawton, the 24th of January, 1817. To Alethea Bigg. I hope this will find all the Streatham party well. We are all in good health, and I have certainly gained strength through the winter and am not far from being well. And I think I understand my own case so much better than I did, as to be able, by care, to keep off any serious return of illness. I am more and more convinced that bile is at the bottom of all I have suffered, which makes it easy to know how to treat myself. Thursday, the 20th of February. My dearest Fanny, you are inimitable, irresistible. You are the delight of my life. Such entertaining letters as you have lately sent. It is very, very gratifying to me to know you so intimately. Oh, what a loss it will be when you are married. I shall hate you when your delicious play of mind is all settled down into conjugal and maternal affections. Mr. James Wildman frightens me. He will have you. I see you at the altar. And yet I do wish you to marry very much, because I know you will never be happy till you are. My dearest Fanny, I cannot bear you should be unhappy about John Plumptre. Think of his father's objection, of want of money, of a coarse mother, of brothers and sisters like horses, of sheets sewn across. Sweet, perverse Fanny. Thursday, the 13th of March. As to making any adequate return for such a letter as yours, my dearest Fanny, it is absolutely impossible. But I will answer your kind questions more than you expect. Miss Catherine is put upon the shelf for the present, and I do not know that she will ever come out. But I have a something ready for publication, which may appear about a 12-month hence. It is short, about the length of Catherine. This is for yourself alone. I am got tolerably well again, quite equal to walking about and enjoying the air, and by sitting down and resting a good while between my walks, I get exercise enough. I have a scheme, however, for accomplishing more as the weather grows spring-like. I mean to take to riding the donkey. It will be more independent and less troublesome than the use of the carriage, and I shall be able to go about with Aunt Cassandra in her walks. Sunday, the 23rd of March. You are the oddest creature. Nervous enough in some respects, but in others perfectly without nerves. Do not oblige Mr. Wildman to read any more. Have mercy on him. Tell him the truth, and make him an apology. He and I should not in the least agree, of course, in our ideas of novels and heroines. Pictures of perfection, as you know, make me sick and wicked. But there is some very good sense in what he says, and I particularly respect him for wishing to think well of all young ladies. It shows an amiable and a delicate mind, and he deserves better treatment than to be obliged to read any more of my works. Many thanks for your kind care for my health. I certainly have not been well for many weeks, and about a week ago I was very poorly. I have had a good deal of fever at times, and indifferent nights, but am considerably better now, and recovering my looks a little, which have been bad enough, black and white and every wrong colour. I must not depend on being ever very blooming again. Sickness is a dangerous indulgence at my time of life. Thank you for everything you tell me. My pleasure in your letters is as great as ever, and I am interested and amused, just as you could wish me. Sunday, the 6th of April. To Charles Austen. My dearest Charles, many thanks for your affectionate letter. I was in your debt before, but I have really been too unwell the last fortnight to write anything that was not absolutely necessary. A few days ago, my complaint appeared removed, but I am ashamed to say that the shock of my uncle's will brought on a relapse, and I was so ill on Friday and thought myself so likely to be worse that I could not but press for Cassandra's returning with Frank after the funeral, which she of course did, and either her return or my disorders choosing to go away have made me better this morning. I live upstairs and am coddled. God bless you all. Conclude me to be going on well, if you hear nothing to the contrary. Will and Testament. Sunday, the 27th of April, 1817. I, Jane Austen, of the parish of Chawton, do by this my last will and testament give and bequeath to my dearest sister Cassandra Elizabeth everything of which I may die possessed, or which may be hereafter due to me, subject to the payment of my funeral expenses, and to a legacy of £50 to my brother Henry, and £50 to Madame Bijon, which I request may be paid as soon as convenient. And I appoint my said dear sister the executrix of this my last will and testament, Jane Austen. Thursday, the 22nd of May. To Anne Sharp. Your kind letter, my dearest Anne, found me in bed, for in spite of my hopes and promises when I wrote to you, I have since been very ill indeed. I have kept my bed since the 13th of April, with only removals to a sofa. Now I am getting well again, and have been gradually, though slowly, recovering my strength for the last 3 weeks. I can sit up in my bed and employ myself, as I am proving to you at this present moment, and really am equal to being out of bed. How to do justice to the kindness of all my family is quite beyond me. Every dear brother so affectionate and so anxious. And as for my sister, words fail me in any attempt to describe what a nurse she has been to me. Thank God she does not seem the worse for it yet. And as there was never any sitting up necessary, I am willing to hope she has no after fatigues to suffer from. My head was always clear, and I had scarcely any pain. My chief sufferings were feverish nights, weaknesses, and languor. A discharge was on me for above a week, and as our Alton apothecary did not pretend to be able to cope with it, better advice was called in. Our nearest very good is at Winchester, where there is a hospital, and capital surgeons, and one of them attended me, and his applications gradually removed the evil. The consequence is, I am going to Winchester for some weeks to see what Mr. Lifford can do towards re-establishing me in tolerable health. On Saturday next, I am actually going thither, my dearest Cassandra with me, I need hardly say. I am now really a very genteel, portable sort of invalid. We have comfortable lodgings engaged, and are to have the accommodation of my elder brother's carriage, which will be sent over from Steventon on purpose. Mrs. Frank Austen has had a much shorter confinement than I have, with a baby to produce into the bargain. We were put to bed nearly at the same time, and she has been quite recovered this great while. I hope you have not been visited with more illness, my dear Anne. Believe me, I was interested in all you wrote, though with all the egotism of an invalid, I write only of myself. Tuesday, the 27th of May, College Street, Winchester. I know no better way, my dearest Edward, of thanking you for your most affectionate concern during my illness than by telling you myself that I continue to get better. I will not boast of my handwriting. Neither that nor my face have yet recovered their beauty, but in other respects I am gaining strength very fast. I am now out of bed from 9 in the morning to 10 at night, upon the sofa, 'tis true, but I eat my meals with Aunt Cass in a rational way, and can employ myself and walk from one room to another. Mr. Lifford says he will cure me, and if he fails, I shall draw up a memorial and lay it before the Dean and Chapter. Our lodgings are very comfortable. Thanks to the kindness of your father and mother in sending me their carriage, my journey hither on Saturday was performed with very little fatigue. But it distressed me to see Uncle Henry and William Knight, who kindly attended us on horseback, riding in rain almost all the way. We expect a visit from them tomorrow and hope they will stay the night. God bless you, my dear Edward. If ever you are ill, may you be as tenderly nursed as I have been, and may you possess the greatest blessing of all, the consciousness of not being unworthy of their love. I could not feel this. Your very affectionate aunt, J.A.
Winchester, Sunday, July the 20th, 1817. My dearest Fanny, doubly dear to me now, for her dear sake whom we have lost. She did love you most sincerely, and never shall I forget the proofs of love you gave her during her illness in writing those kind, amusing letters, when I know your feelings would have dictated so different a style. Take the only reward I can give you in my assurance that your benevolent purpose was answered. You did contribute to her enjoyment. Even your last letter afforded pleasure. I merely cut the seal and gave it to her. She opened it and read it herself. Afterwards she gave it to me to read, and then talked a little, and not uncheerfully, of its contents. But there was a languor about her which prevented her taking the same interest in anything she had been used to. Since Tuesday evening, when her complaint returned, there was a visible change. She slept more and much more comfortably. Indeed, during the last 48 hours, she was asleep more than awake. Her looks altered, and she fell away. But though I was hopeless of a recovery, I had no suspicion how rapidly my loss was approaching. She was the sun of my life. I had not a thought concealed from her, and it is as if I had lost a part of myself. I loved her only too well, not better than she deserved, but I am conscious that my affection for her made me sometimes unjust and negligent of others, and I can acknowledge the justice of the hand which has struck this blow. She felt herself to be dying about half an hour before she became tranquil and apparently unconscious. During that half hour was her struggle. Poor soul. She said she could not tell us what she suffered, though she complained of little fixed pain. When I asked her if there was anything she wanted, her answer was, she wanted nothing but death. Oh, I do hope I do not break your heart, my dearest Fanny, by these particulars. I mean to afford you gratification whilst relieving my own feelings. I could not write so to anybody else. When the clock struck 6, she was talking to me. Mr. Lifford had been sent for, had applied something to give her ease, and she was in a state of quiet insensibility by 7 at the latest. From that time till 4:30, when she ceased to breathe, she scarcely moved a limb, so that we had every reason to think, with gratitude to the Almighty, that her sufferings were over. I was able to close her eyes myself, and even now in her coffin there is such a sweet, serene air over her countenance as is quite pleasant to contemplate. The last sad ceremony is to take place on Thursday morning. Her dear remains are to be deposited in the cathedral. It is a satisfaction to me that they are to lie in a building she admired so much. Her precious soul, I presume to hope, reposes in a far superior mansion. Your dear papa, your uncles Henry and Frank, and Edward Austen instead of his father will attend. The ceremony must be over before 10 o'clock, as the cathedral service begins at that hour, so we shall be home early in the day, for there will be nothing to keep us here afterwards. Most affectionately yours, Cassandra Elizabeth Austen.
In the Letters of Jane Austen, Fiona Shaw was Jane Austen. The letters were abridged by Lissa Demetriou, produced by Stuart Richards, and directed by Alan Drury. The Letters of Jane Austen was a Mr. Punch production.